These unconventional times require unconventional conversations. Listen in as your host, Richard Gordon, engages in one-on-one conversations with numerous leaders, elected officials, politicians, and others to learn what's happening in your state, on the Hill, and across America. Now, here's the host of Unconventional Times, Richard Gordon.
Hello, this is Unconventional Times. I'm your host, Richard Gordon. Thank you for joining us. You know, when I started this podcast a little over a year ago, I named it Unconventional Times because things were pretty unconventional. We had the President of the United States decide not to run for re-election, and we also had a former President of the United States decide to run for re-election, something that hasn't happened in over 100 years. If I had to do it all over again, considering everything going on in today's world, I might have called it Strange Times, even though I think that might have been taken already. Because these are strange times. Look, the federal government has been shut down for the first time since 2018. Nearly 1 million federal workers have been furloughed, many of which have been fired. State troopers have been nationalized and have been sent to major American cities. But in the middle of all of this, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, has had many successes. He negotiated a major agreement to bring the Israeli hostages home after 2 years in captivity, something that no one else has been able to do. He passed one of the most sweeping pieces of legislation in modern history, and he has truly transformed the federal government, probably more than any president since Franklin Roosevelt. With me today are three experts who have served at the highest level of state government and politics. They understand how government works. They understand how government doesn't work. And they get politics. One is from the Northeast, one is from the Midwest, one is from the Southwest. We've kind of covered America here. They have been leaders in the Republican Party for decades. So let me start with my first guest. Jayne Millerick is the vice president of the DCI Group, which is a leading global affairs firm. Before joining DCI, she was the chief of staff for 8 years to the Republican governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, and she was the chair of the New Hampshire Republican Party. John Hammond is a partner at the Taft Law Firm, serving in their public affairs group. He's had extensive public service experience, served as the senior advisor to Governor Orr of Indiana. He was a member of the Republican National Committee for 12 years and was their general counsel for many years as well. Keith Gardner is the president of KJG Strategies, which is a leading national consulting firm. He served in the New Hampshire House of Representatives for 4 terms, and he rose to the position of minority whip in just 4 years. Kind of a meteoric rise. He was the chief of staff to Susana Martinez for 8 years, the Republican governor of New Mexico. Hey, welcome to all of you. Welcome to Unconventional Times.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Glad to be with you, Richard. Thank you.
Great having you. Hey, let's start with what is on everybody's mind, the shutdown. As I just said, we're in day 17 of a federal shutdown. Jayne, I'm going to start with you, if I may. You know, most Americans hear about it. They don't really understand it. They don't really understand what is going on out there. All they see, and I have to tell you, I turn on the TV and I see Chuck Schumer arguing and saying things. Some are true, some are not true. I see the Speaker of the House saying things. Some are true, some aren't true. I think the American people are confused about what is going on out there. Jayne, your thoughts about what's really happening?
Well, I think where I'd like to start is just with perspective, because being sort of in this political world, as we all are, we are very much focused on this shutdown. But for the average person, they're really not. And the reason why shutdowns end is because things happen where that's no longer the case. There's some service or something happening in their lives that now impacts them directly. And that's where you see the public pressure start to build. And so, you know, just coming from a governor's office in New Hampshire for many years, we would sort of plan out these potential shutdowns. And for state services, and many of those funded by the federal government and directly impact people, you can go, 30 to 45 days without much of an impact. You've kind of taken in funds as much as you can to directly serve folks, and so that they won't see a change in services, for 30 to 45 days. And so you do have a little bit of a buffer time, which I think we are currently in, where it's not impacting a lot of people. Now, having said that, we are already hearing from these national leaders that they want to take a lot of those negative impacts off the table, especially from Republicans, wanting to be sure that folks like members of our military are paid, our federal workers are paid in these critical areas. And so that's where we're going to start to see some of that public outcry build as these stories of, individuals not being paid, not showing up to work, and potentially having impact on our air traffic control, which will make people late or not have flights at all. And so as that builds, that's where this perspective will start to change, and where it's going to start to matter to people.
Hey, Keith, we're talking about the pressure building and whatnot, but if you take these things off the table, if you start paying the military, if you pay TSA is not getting paid, if you pay TSA, for example, can't this just go on forever?
Yeah, I think, well, again, yeah, this is what Jayne said. There has to be some sort of pressure. And the bigger problem is, the vast majority of the public's going, I haven't felt it. And what you're seeing out of the leadership on both sides is everybody trying to get the one step up. This is the ugliness of politics. It's not my fault, it's theirs. And this is why they're doing something wrong. But yeah, if these little pressure points start to get relieved, it'll just extend out, I think, how long this thing goes. And there's some people who believe that's a good thing. There are those out there who believe that's a good thing. The bottom line is it'll only change when it's affected by the normal mom and dad who candidly today don't even care about the politics of this stuff. They're not Republicans, they're not Democrats. They're just families trying to go figure out how to make their mortgage, take care of their kids, those type of things. When it starts affecting those folks, that's when things will start moving.
Hey, John, let's talk about strategy a little bit.
Sure.
You were at the RNC for a long time. You were a committeeman. You were the general counsel. You've been in thousands of strategy meetings. What's the strategy here? What is the thought process behind this? Both the Democrats and Republicans, I'm sure if you ask them separately, they're saying, oh my God, we are winning this war. We're really up on the other guys. What are people thinking inside the political realms? Why are they doing this? What advantage do they think they're going to get?
First, I'll stipulate to everything Jayne and Keith mentioned. This will have to go on actually quite some time, probably past whatever the record, 35 days has been, at least in my
35 days
lifetime.
in 2018.
Yeah. So that will start to weigh on the infrastructure, so to speak, out there in a big way. Just back here in Indiana, before I address the actual question you raised, who's winning, who's losing, what's going on behind the scenes, what are they thinking? In Indiana, for example, Mike Braun said, their budget director, our new governor in that administration said, look, just implement the plans we've already had in place. Go back to Jayne's point. We've seen these things before. We'll get through it. We have reserves to deal with that. But here's what you don't have reserves for. You may have Medicaid waivers that really become important, that until they're effectuated and approved out of either CMS or HHS, you can't proceed with some of the programs that will affect the average walking around person. And then you start to see feel the pressure that Keith's talking about. So that's kind of how I see it as well.
On that point, John, you also can't get a small business loan. You also can't, we could just walk through
believe
this.
me, I just dealt with one of those at the SBA, and there's nobody there to receive the email. Okay. So that's all true. Now, I went through the airport, got through quickly. Nobody's feeling that at the airport at the moment. I have a son in the military, serves in the Pacific, not getting paid, but he'll get paid. At some point it'll all get worked out. That's what they think today. Goes past 40 days, 60 days, that's another matter. So who's winning? This is a hard one. I don't think you can really say, who's winning and who's losing. At a certain point in time, the administration, the White House will make a calculation that they've got to find some way to work a deal. Somebody on the other end is going to have to kind of give as well on the Democratic side, with Chuck Schumer or others. But there's no impetus for that right now. So I think the idea here is we want to win on certain key issues. We do not want to give in on the ACA piece and some other things that they've reformed in the large tax omnibus bill. Some people call it the big beautiful bill, et cetera. Just some things have gotten left out of that. So that's those sort of talking points inside the Beltway are being fought out, but I don't think anybody back home thinks anything other than the fact this is the normal situation. It's why we have cynicism about the process. We don't. It undermines the confidence in the public trust. It's something that really is not going to be helpful and never has been helpful to either side. And typically, the entity in power is going to get blamed ultimately because they have all the levers. So you can make that case in a campaign. Jayne and Keith and others have done that before, and we know how to message that. So I think the Republicans have to be very careful, given their position of authority at the moment, about how far out this has to go. And this actually becomes something that's deep inside the populace in America.
John, politics or policy?
Well, it's right now about policy. The politics will play out in a pretty ugly way if it has to be carried out beyond sort of the 45 to 60 days, I think.
Jayne, were you trying to come in?
I was just wanting to say, to John's point, when you think about also what everybody's doing and what the plays are on the field right now, it's interesting to me that the Democrats have AOC and they have Bernie Sanders out there. I mean, Schumer too, but I think eventually shutdowns end, not only because of the broad political pressure that the public creates, but those in the middle decide this is unpalatable. And so you have to really be careful in these situations to ensure that whoever you're putting out front are folks that in the end are going to respond to the arguments being made by the whatever party spokespeople. So it's interesting to me that the Democrats are choosing what I would consider to be their most liberal, most left spokespeople to be out there on this issue. In the end, I don't know how that plays, because they're going to be the ones that kind of refuse to compromise, right? I just don't know how that plays for them.
I can't tell if the Democrats are putting them out there or they can't keep them away.
Well, we know that happens.
It's got to be the latter.
Both parties.
It's got to be the latter. They can't control those two people.
If I were the Republican Party, I would make a major contribution to CNN. And I would say, please do a town hall every week with the two of them, as they did this week. Because Jayne, I agree. They are a part of the Democratic Party that is not connected to the mainstream of either the Democratic Party or the country. But listen, the three of you have all served at the highest levels in state government. So Jayne, let's just keep going on that. How does this affect states? You've each run states. Tell me, in each of your states, how does this affect the states themselves?
Well, there's a few programs, very important programs that states administrate for the federal government. So in addition to those things that just happen in our states, right? Like national parks and, national forests. Folks on the ground don't really draw a distinction. So they say, this is shut down, that must be the governor's fault. And so, really in shutdowns, we are very much attuned to knowing that even though something that's happening may not be our fault as a governor, it's our responsibility to be articulating what's happening. And so you'll see governors out there talking about state parks and state forests and national parks, national forests, and national programs that are being impacted, even though we may not administrate them. But on the other side of that, there are programs that run through the state government, like unemployment is a big one. We generally will ensure we have enough funding, at least 30 to 60 days, to ensure that unemployment trust funds are not impacted, at least in the short term. And so that's a big one. And then also on the Health and Human Services side, of course, we administrate things like SNAP and benefits and, all of the different provider services that are relied upon. And again, in the short term, we can get through that as states, but as those reserves start to kind of peter out, there are real impacts, and that's when we start seeing the problems.
Keith, you're going to make a comment about New Mexico?
Well, I would say, it's funny. I think going back to your previous question, there is an absolute base who agrees that this shutdown needs to happen because people are tired of just the junk and the terrible spending the federal government does. Our debt is out of control. We've got all kinds of debt issues as a country. And so the states operate very differently. As you know, states don't encumber debt. They tend to live within their means. And so we also know how to pivot very quickly as a state and say, okay, and I'm in New Mexico. I was chief staff of the governor in New Mexico, the most dependent on federal dollar state in the country. And during these shutdowns, we have 4 labs, national labs. We have a ton of national parks and all that, national forests and all those things. And you get through because you're prepared. You're ready for these things. You have as Jayne said, you have every contingency base, but you can only prepare for so long and for so much before it really starts to impact the people that you serve. And so it's distinguishing, hey, this is what state government does. This is what the federal government does. But to wrap around this whole thing, that's the frustration I think a lot of people have with the federal government. There seems to be no touch, no accountability back. And this spending, some of the spending, when you start to look at this stuff, is insane. And that is not partisan. Both sides have issues with earmarks. And it's just not something we see. We don't see log rolling in the states where you have a state budget filled with all kind of tchotchkes and wonderful little things for everybody to try and buy constituents. That's not how we roll in state government. And I think it's
Thank you for throwing in a word of Yiddish in here. Coming from you, New Mexico, it's always appreciated.
Boy,
so,
hey.
Keith, thank you.
Exactly.
Here's another aspect that people don't understand about the impact on state government. If you're a Medicaid director, no matter which state it is, that federal dollar that you can leverage with state money, and again, it's sort of inside baseball. The average walking around interested person is not really going to understand this, but that leveraged dollar, that federal dollar, helps put in place a program that fits that particular state in a way, and its budget. So a number of things have happened to where that's been impinged, and states now are scrambling. Jayne talked about SNAP. That's a whole nother question that you probably have on your list there, Richard. But the point is that when those dollars don't flow, you have some issues. Ultimately, it's going to catch up to your state budget because it is intermingled. It is something in a federal system. This is as the agent for that particular program at the state level for your constituents. It may have a real impact, and then that's these Medicaid directors shed a tear every time a federal dollar like that disappears because they count on it for innovation and a way to make sure their budget, which is a growing budget. That takes away money from education, corrections, everything else. When you got a Medicaid budget that's growing in a way, you're trying to find some way to leverage more federal money and spend less state budget dollars.
John, you know me well. Yes, we're going to talk about SNAP, but it's coming a little later, unless we switch to it. Look, real quickly, each of you, you already told me how it's going to end. I want to know when it's going to end. Jayne, what do you think? Prediction.
Oh boy.
Are we going to talk about this over Thanksgiving?
I think we might. There's no end in sight as far as what I'm hearing. I'm a New Hampshire resident and work from New Hampshire, but I do a lot of work in Washington, and so the kind of the talk on the ground here is no end in sight. Certainly, there is a very large anti-shutdown planned for Washington this weekend. And so there's no date. I hope you're not going to hold us to a date, Richard. I don't think I could give one at this point, other than to say definitely could be Thanksgiving.
Keith?
Yeah, I'm the same way. I think I'm going to buy a lottery ticket rather than predict this one out because you got better odds.
I'm going to say December 15th.
Oh,
okay.
I'll go earlier than that. I think it's going to be right around Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just so I don't
But
leave you guys hanging, I feel if you're going to predict, I might as well go on a limb too.
go
Yeah,
for it.
I think it's going to be around Thanksgiving, and I'll tell you why. And we're going to get to this a little later. I think when this goes back to what each of you said in the very beginning, average people need to be heard. I hate to say that, but that's the truth. This ended last time because 10 air traffic controllers decided not to come to work, and it snarled the whole system. What's going to happen here, and one thing before I get to that, is I think when these subsidies start ending for the ACA and people start looking at their bills and seeing a 20, 30, 40% increase, that's going to affect millions and millions of people. 20 million, it's over 20, it's about 25 million. Interestingly enough, very interestingly enough, the majority of them are in Republican congressional districts. So my thought is if this goes to Thanksgiving and these people come home for Thanksgiving and they're at the supermarket and Republican congressmen are being told we cannot afford our health care, they're going to go back to Washington and they're going to change that. So I'm going in with right after
You
Thanksgiving.
are. I bet you're all wrong. You call this program Unconventional Times. It's or Strange Days, whatever the name needs to
Unconventional
be.
times.
But you've got the most unconventional White House in my lifetime
Surely.
that you've ever seen. And so they're thinking of this differently, and they're working with the Mike Johnsons and others of the Republican world to kind of sort out kind of how to make sure they uh, nail down some I guess wins out of this thing. And I think that's going to take longer than Thanksgiving. So we would all think about that because it's a big travel day and all that business, all travel, holiday. But I think they're going to drag it out because I think there's a lot at stake in 26 and on both sides of the aisle. And I think they're all playing for keeps. So I'm going with the longer date.
It's an
Okay. Well,
interesting point. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh no, Jayne, please.
I was going to say it's an interesting point that you raised, John, because we've seen that this White House definitely will take what some would say controversial stance that do
Unconventional, I
include
would say.
pain, that do include pain for even some of their strongest constituents. I mean, you think about tariffs, and we don't have to get into the big tariff discussion, but of course,
We're going to in
there are
about 1
always
second.
there there are always such impacts to spending and to pricing for constituents and for consumers, the average person. And when you look at some of the data behind whether people support the president, whether his supporters support some short-term pain in order to deliver those tariffs, we see people are willing to take the short-term pain, which is interesting to me because, years ago that wouldn't happen. So to your point, John, you're right. I think there's some things that we would consider to be political pressure that are no longer on the table.
So
And I think we're all just pretending to think we know what the outcome. I
course we
ultimately,
don't.
right? We're just right.
We have
We're
no
going to say afterwards, no, but afterwards we're all going to go, yeah, well, that's what we expected. I mean, truly, we don't know. Things have worked out very well for him. Let's be candid and
That's
clear.
right.
I mean,
That's
he's
right.
used unconventional means and has had a lot of success as a result. So I think we may be talking in 3 months if we are allowed back and go, dang, that was really smart. Or holy crap,
Yeah.
that was a disaster, right? You just don't know
Right.
until you know, right? So
I did an interview and a couple weeks later they asked me to come back on and it was a national TV thing and I said, gee, I'm glad to be back on. I was wrong on everything I said last time. And they said,
right.
don't worry about it. No one remembers. It's okay. I'm going to hold each of you to your
Yeah.
prediction. But look, I don't want tariffs to go away. So John, you're a farm state. Let's start with you. Um, Look, the tariffs have hit Indiana farmers pretty hard. When Indiana had markets, let's say in China, those markets have now dried up. Countries like Brazil are filling the market with their agricultural products. Someday, this whole tariff thing is going to get worked out, but China is not going to come back to Indiana. China is going to go back to Brazil and keep that relationship going. How does this affect farmers across America? And isn't this a base group of, the Trump coalition?
Absolutely. And, this geopolitical chess game that's going on with tariffs is a big piece of that has really impacted us here in Indiana and all across the Midwest. almost 50% of our soybean crop, I hope I've got this right, I think I do, really is exported to China, or has been. We have stuff sitting not in the fields necessarily, but in grain bins, various places, overfilling because we don't know exactly when that's going to be relieved. So it's not just the tariff itself; it's the erraticness of what is next, not knowing. And so I don't know what our partners across the globe are anticipating one thing or the other, but I have to tell you, farmers here are very concerned, and they are voicing their concern here. So, as a Republican in this state, thinking about our 2026 elections, it'll have an impact here, just at the local level, what I call local level, our state, our General Assembly, and other races. That's an impact. But it's up against it. I'll stop. I would say this: the edge and the reason I think people as patriots in a way, as farmers, are thinking, and as an American, look, I want to be supportive because I don't like China. I think China is a threat to us on so many levels. But in the meantime, I'm the chess piece being played out here, and it's hurting me. And they're really, I think, caught in a little bit of a vice about what to say and what to do. But they are speaking out here in Indiana right now.
Let me switch then, unless someone else has something else on tariffs. I want to talk about the Trump spending bill because I think it's, first of all, I think it's an amazing accomplishment, and I think it should be acknowledged for that. And whether you like President Trump or not, or whether you support this sweeping spending bill or not, the one that became law on July 4th, I think Jayne, both you and John referenced it before. I mean, I think it's one of the greatest legislative triumphs, literally, of my lifetime. And it's radical in a sense, in the use of the word, not the political use of the word radical, but it's radical in the sense of its breadth and how it engages all Americans. And there's a lot of spending for ICE, for the border, for the Defense Department, for security, for things like that. Obviously, it makes the tax cuts from his first administration permanent. They were temporary, going to expire, so it makes it permanent. But to pay for all of this, and this was alluded to a little bit before, there were massive cuts to Medicare, massive cuts to children's programs like SNAP, which Jayne, I think you referenced, the Women's and Infants, the WIC program, Women, Infant, and Children program, and obviously to climate, where a lot of those initiatives were eliminated. Keith, I know you and I have spoken about this before. Talk to me about the effect the bill is going to have on the states, both on a positive level and possibly on a negative side.
So I appreciate that, Richard. I'm still looking. I actually want to see these massive cuts. I want to know where they are. Someone needs to point that out in the bill because there's a decrease in spending. There's accountability built in, but specifically on the Medicaid, I keep hearing about Medicaid cuts, Medicaid cuts. And the truth is that Medicaid's not cut. There's some reduction in spending through cost savings over the long term. But I've read it. Maybe I can't read. I did go to public school in New Mexico, but I don't see where that is. What
your wife's a teacher, so I'm not going to take that as a criticism.
Exactly. She won't. Yeah, exactly. She's always disappointed in my education anyway, Richard. But I think what we're seeing is, again, politicizing some parts of this. And look, on the climate side, yes, there were cuts to some of those programs. But when we use the word cuts, it should mean something. And so we see it on the Medicaid side. In fact, you look at the rural health transition funds that are the first $25 billion that is coming out supposedly by the end of the year. You have another tranche of $25 billion over 5 years that's going to innovation, and what really it's changing the dynamic of healthcare and healthcare delivery in this country that has needed to happen for a long time. We have a fragile rural healthcare delivery system in a very rural state. Incredibly fragile. It was built on a system that's not sustainable. It's not viable and it's not sustainable the way it's built. Our reimbursement process is wrong. I spent my whole career, as you know, Richard, in healthcare. And we reimburse for sick care. We don't reimburse for healthcare. That's cliche. We've said it for years. But the innovation, the way we do things today is the same way we did it when I started practicing a long time ago. And this innovation and innovative change. I go to the SNAP part about this, where we talk about the cuts to SNAP. Like, wait a minute, it's really a cut to expect a state to not have an error rate of over 20%. Have an error rate of 20% on your taxes and see what the IRS does to you. But for some reason, we're supposed to allow states to have these massive error rates that just waste federal money because it's not, that's federal dollar, it's not state dollar. What do we care? That's wrong. And we should hold every taxpayer dollar as being precious and important. So I actually have a little bit different take on it. Sorry, you want to say something? I can see you're dying to say something.
No, I mean, look, I hear what you're saying. There's no way of arguing that the money that Biden put in to give people assistance in buying healthcare is going to get wiped out if they don't resolve it through this budget issue, through the shutdown.
Right.
So two things are going to happen. Numerous people are going to lose health care, which means because they can't afford it anymore, which means they're going to go to the emergency room, which means you're going to end up paying for it, right? Because that's how that one works. And people are going to end up paying more money. So their prices are going up. So that's the healthcare piece of it. I understand your point about error rates, and
Right.
I agree with you completely. We got to eliminate real waste and fraud out of the system, not made up waste and fraud, but real waste and fraud has to go. I agree with you.
But these are two separate issues, Richard. The Medicaid piece that people are talking about from HR1 and the ACA's subsidies
Sure.
are two different issues that have been commingled because it makes it sexy and it's a talking point politically. I agree with you. There has to be discussion around the ACA subsidies that people will lose and premiums are going to climb if we don't do that. But we need to have a real discussion. Is that the right thing to do? I'm not saying it is, or I'm not saying it's not, but it's a separate issue to what is going on via HR1. John,
I think that's, I mean, Keith's on target, right? Because I mean, inside this gigantic piece of legislation, these healthcare provisions that really are probably the most substantial healthcare reform at the federal level we've seen in decades. I mean, if you track, I don't know, Brian Blades, who worked for George W. Bush on a policy level, who's got a lot of hands on some of the policy that found its way in there at a Paragon Institute. They spent a lot of time on these things. It is a substantial reform. And you have to think about it, conservative versus liberal. What is your philosophy about the use of taxpayer dollars for those who are most in need? And this is an attempt to try to get your arms wrapped around some of that, so that the people who really, really are suffering and need the help, they receive it in what in a fiscally constrained time. The problem with the bill ultimately is the additional debt it's been carved on top of the unbelievable massive national debt that we have. And so that is a conservative Republican. I don't like that. As an establishment sort of traditional fiscal conservative, I have a hard time with it. I think what I do like in the bill are the healthcare provisions that are major reforms that, it's going to cause some fallout. But we have to make some adjustments here. Unfortunately, a lot of the other spending, which might be necessary for national defense and other issues, it's taken that bill way over the top, and the only way we're going to be able to fund it is through additional debt.
Well, and Jayne, you're in Washington a lot. The question I was going to ask you in dealing with what John just said, okay, but is this the right way to do it? Wasn't there a better way to do this? Wasn't there a debate about healthcare, the right way to do this, instead of creating one massive bill that just shoves everything into it? It makes it overly partisan. I mean, obviously the plan was to get this huge bill passed because it is pretty amazing when you think about how sweeping it is. But was this the right way to do it? Or could we have had the debate that John was just talking about?
For this day and age that we're in, it absolutely was the right strategy. The reason why is, and this is not to belabor the answer to the question, but look, Washington has been broken for 20, 25 years. Before President Trump took office, literally you could not point to one accomplishment, one piece of legislation, one actually well thought out bill that was passed and deliberated on by Congress. I mean, look what the budget process has become. It's become this stopgap. We have to fund the government for another, short term because we don't have an answer to the longer term budget problem. So that's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's just true about Washington. And so I think it was the right strategy to put it all in one bill, because what would have happened realistically is potentially 20% of the president's agenda would have gotten passed. And let's face it, the president's agenda is what the American people voted for. He was elected president based on what he stood for, many of which his programs are included in that bill. And so there was an expectation by electing him, these things were going to happen. And that bill and that mechanism was the right choice, just because I think Washington, unfortunately, is broken and you aren't going to have true deliberations. And that's a bigger conversation that could probably take up, 2 or 3 different conversations going forward. But it's unfortunately where we are in Washington. And I think it was a monumental task to even get that passed. And so is it going to be perfect? No. But there was an expectation that changed and that things were going to happen, and that was the vehicle that it came through.
Well, I do agree. I think the president did run on this. He did say what he wanted, and he's delivered. I mean, he promise made, promise kept. I mean, he truly did on this. But Jayne, when you think about it, do you think it struck the right balance? I mean, when you really boil it down, it's tax cuts and security, right? Border security and immigration, all those other things on one side. And on the other side, you probably have healthcare and the environment. And that was sort of the balance when you just look at it. Did they strike the right balance? I mean, wiping out all of the climate change stuff for the tax cuts, is that smart? Does that help? What do you think?
The right balance as defined by the American people. When they elected President Trump, the majority of our country wanted to see those changes. And so is it right for everyone? No. I mean, purely significant.
Well, we all breathe air.
What's that?
We all breathe air.
Yeah,
So
and I think
it's important to all of us.
It's a win for our for the folks that obviously voted for the president. It's a win for folks that want to see our country succeed. I don't think you're ever going to pass a bill where everyone's happy with everything that's in there. But you have to take the good with the bad in order to get progress and get change.
Keith, I see you want to say.
Well, it's interesting to pivot to the next part of what we were talking about. I think you're seeing this reflected in what the American people are saying. You've got 2 gubernatorial elections in 2 states that you would actually expect as a result of this to have, frankly, a lot of Democratic surge. And you're not seeing that surge in New Jersey or Virginia. You're seeing actually incredibly tight races, unexpectedly tight races, actually, in some cases. And I think what you said, you talk about the environmental side. Yeah, we all breathe there, and the fact that the Democrats nor the Republicans have the ownership of being the best on that issue, right? Everybody cares about the environment. We may care about it differently because we all do. But when you see what's going on politically in these states, where you would think, to your base question, there would be this expansive or surge by the Democratic candidate, you don't see that. And it's reflected in, this is what the American people voted for, and this is what the American people are expecting. And shockingly, it may be unconventional, but for the first time, I think the unconventional part about this is someone's actually delivering on what they promised when they ran for office. That may be the most unconventional part of this whole thing. And so I don't think you're seeing it reflected in the everyday people, the way we look at it politically, because of those, just the polling numbers. And we'll see what the elections turn out. I know you want to pivot to that anyway, Richard.
I'll get there eventually. But hey, John, a big part of this thing was the tax cuts, and the big part of the tax cut is to spur the economy. Do you think it's going to spur the economy?
Well, so many other factors you got to consider. I'm not an economist. I'm a scientist, but I'm a political scientist. So I have to address it that way. It probably will for those that still have capital that out there that want to risk it. That's what we should encourage. Okay, and we need to have investment in a whole lot of areas. We at the same time, some of that investment is disruptive, right? We are changing the nature of the workforce. As we think about these things, we have these big trends that we're trying to map The anxiety people have, going back to Keith's point, they're not thinking about the environment a lot. Richard, you are. I am. Went to a pretty good liberal arts institution. I, studied a little bit in the sciences, literally. But, that we understand some of the science behind it, all the concerns about it. That's not what they're thinking about. They're thinking about their pocketbooks right now. They are being squeezed. It's been something that's happened since the near global meltdown in 08, 09. These after effects, these aftershocks continue to reverberate. And underlying it all is a change, is technology that's driving a lot of change in the workforce. And so people are struggling when they might have had a $32 an hour job. Now they've got two, maybe $12 an hour jobs in Kokomo, Indiana, and they're having trouble making all the things happen that they thought were part of the American dream. Those are the anxieties that are underneath all of this. So when you think about, okay, do they balance the environment, inside this bill? That's not what people voted for. And they were trying to find somebody they want somebody to come into the temple of government and kick over the tables. And they got so in a couple of different elections with a little pause in between, 4-year hiatus, that's what they voted for. And it's not something we can talk more about whether it's right or wrong, the way some of it happens. A lot of the policies are right, but somehow they're executed often in the wrong way from my perspective, right? We'll talk more about that later. But that's a rambling discussion to say, I love your concern about the environment, but it's not the concern of the average walking around person in America at the moment.
So we're sort of playing around this topic. I'll ask you just really quickly. We've talked about the base, we've talked about farmers, we've talked about different people. I'm not asking you personally, but I'm asking you how you think it is going. How do you think Trump is doing generally? We talked, Jayne, about, he said what he said, he did what he said he would do. Keith, you said how unconventional it is, great word, by the way, how unconventional it is to actually deliver. How's the president doing? Jayne? We'll go geographically.
We'll start in the Northeast. And New Hampshire is definitely a purple state in what is very much a blue region. So I come from a state where there's all kinds of different opinions. My opinion is that he's doing very well. Especially, we've talked a lot about domestic policy, but the international policies that he's putting forward, the incredible work that he did on the Middle East and in Gaza, unprecedented success. And, I think it's something that
for which he deserves a lot of credit.
100%. And those type of wins take a lot of international problems off the table for America. And I think, during President Biden's time, there was a lot of consternation, a lot of concern about how other countries were dealing with the United States, how we were dealing with other countries, uncertainty, a little bit of, nervousness around that. And I think for this president, that concern is largely taken off the table. And so he deserves a lot of credit for that. So overall, high marks from me.
John?
Indiana, he gets high marks here. In general, everything he's done. Again, we talked a little bit about some of the things that cut against that with the tariffs and farmers here, but that's only really 3% of our GDP. People think Indiana's nothing but farms. It's not really true. It's a lot about manufacturing and trying to really kind of right size and sort of redesign the culture in a more common sense way. You can use the word less woke or phrase less woke, whatever. They like what they see. They like the idea he's vigorous. Okay, he's flooding the zone with all kinds of things. So many things happening all at one time. With so many things we could talk about today about just all the things that they've initiated, whether they're conventional or unconventional. I think people want to see action. And they want to see something better than what they've received from the federal government, or maybe all of government as they perceive it. So in Indiana, he gets high marks. I can talk personally about how I feel about the way these things are executed, where I think that behavior that I see out of a leader in the White House is something I would model for my children. I would not, ever. So, I can be very critical on a personal level. But politically, he's scoring a lot of points here.
How about you, Keith? What are you seeing in the Southwest?
It's interesting. I live in a very blue state, as you know, Richard. You spend a lot of time out here, and but we're a border state, and I think really the key out here has been our border security issues are real. The crime issues related to it. We have a huge crime problem, especially in the Albuquerque metro area. So I do think there's a lot of closet support, if you will. It has upset the political class in the state. It gives them somebody to beat up and talk bad about publicly. But generally in the Southwest, I think people are responding to where things are going, and actually they have this hope that some of this craziness on the border, especially, is going to get under control. John kind of said it earlier. I think form wise, there's always not exactly the form I would use. I think substantively, there's been a lot of good substance. And I think we have to look at, for me, what really matters at the end of the day is the substance of what's coming out. Finally, there's some movement in DC. Thank God.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the tone of politics, because I think the three of you lived in a time, worked in a time where worked with governors, where the tone of politics was different, and you were able to be very successful in a number of ways, by turning the heat down, not turning the heat up. And what we're seeing more and more, I think, is that politics is becoming harsher. Politicians I think the only way to win is to crush their opponent. We see the politics of retribution, the indictments of James Comey, of Letitia James, last night of John Bolton. We see the firing of U.S. attorneys who disagree with the president, refusal to fund infrastructure, major infrastructure projects that are in Democratic states, the use of the IRS to punish opponents. We haven't seen this before. This is very, very, very unusual. And I'm just interested in your views on how the public looks at some of this stuff, because, look, I live in a state that has a massive infrastructure project that the president stopped because he didn't like what the Democratic senator said. What do you guys think? Jayne?
Start from, as I said, from a purple state of New Hampshire. You're right. I had the benefit of working for a governor who was very much Republican and very much stood strong on conservative ideals, but recognized that we could get more done with working together and
An
ensuring
incredibly
that
nice guy.
we turn the tone down and connect with voters. And so, I think he always used to say, and we always used to say, that when you are sort of in a situation where you're working across the aisle, you give a little to get a lot. And that was kind of our philosophy. And so, just as far as tone goes, though, I think you're right. I think nationally we're seeing the tone the heat way up in politics. I think it's contributing to a lot of what we're seeing from the American people and from certain segments and individuals who unfortunately have decided that violence is something that they want to take into their hands. And it's terrible. And political violence obviously is never tolerated, but it's something that we're dealing with more and more on both sides of the aisle. And so, what we always tried to do, and what I'm hopeful that we'll get to more as a country, is understanding that we are able to, get what we need politically and policy wise, and doing it in a way that we kind of bridge. And I think it's different for states. I mean, New Hampshire, as I said, is a purple state. There are lots of red states that are very conservative. There are lots of blue states that are very liberal. And so the necessity to be toning the heat down in those states is not always as important as it is in purple states, where you have to work together. Otherwise, things don't get done. I will say one thing, just to just plug a little bit, chiefs of staff, Keith, former chief of staff, and the role of state governors and their staff leaders in ensuring that, at least at the state level, that tone is turned way down, is something that we take great pride in, and that people should have faith in, knowing that, a lot of the governors, regardless of party, are friends. They speak to each other all the time. They text. Chiefs of staff make sure we bridge our relationships, and so we're there for each other in crisis, regardless of party. And so, although we may see this heat turned way up nationally, have confidence in knowing that your state governors and their chiefs of staff are working very closely across the aisle from state borders, just to be sure we're there for our constituents.
I want to turn to politics quickly in the few minutes we have left. Keith, you raised the 2025 gubernatorial elections. I consider this, I've been doing this a really long time. And there's only two races, Virginia and New Jersey. This is one of the weirdest gubernatorial elections I have ever seen, and actually, frankly, one of the most disappointing. And it goes to the tone issue. So we have a Democratic candidate in New Jersey who's accusing her Republican opponent of killing people because he was a publisher of medical texts and put out stuff on fentanyl as a painkiller. So she's accusing him of killing 10,000 people. At the same time, the Trump administration released her college records. She was at the U.S. Naval Academy where she didn't walk for graduation, and he's calling her a cheater. In Virginia, the whole race is the Democrat was way ahead, but the whole race is turning on the attorney general candidate who made hideous comments, Jayne, about what you're talking about political violence and using bullets on an opponent. What is going on out there? I mean, we are taking these races that are supposed to be about how we help, our citizens and turning them into conflicts about what? About whether someone walked during graduation, whether someone killed someone with fentanyl, which he had nothing to do with, whether the candidate for governor is responsible for the attorney general who said awful things. I mean, John, what's going on with our politics?
It's really unbelievable. I was in Virginia last week on business, watched all the commercials in and out of things. It's unbelievable how vitriolic they are. And I thought Virginia was a very genteel, refined state. So it really follows the coarsening of our culture. It's something that's been, we've seen it. And I really do ascribe to what Jayne said about governors, but even we can be at that state level infected by the sort of non-normal sort of approach to how we deal with issues and argue with people. So now the political system lags the culture always, but it reflects the culture certainly always, and that's what's happening. And someone has to take a responsible leadership position and say that's enough. Enough's enough. I don't know who that is in Virginia. I don't know who that is in New Jersey, but it is out of control. And if you watch any of that, what's going on there, either paid media or earned media, it is really disgusting. We don't do that in Indiana, by the way. That's not how in the worst, most competitive situations, we don't get to that level. So I don't know what's going on out there on the coast, but it needs to stop.
John, I agree with you. I think in Indiana, it's become such a red state that it's not really competitive enough to matter.
Well, you could say that, but it was at one point in time, and you actually worked for a governor here who actually won, and we had 16 years of Democratic governors in my lifetime, in between other, reigns by Republicans. So we can flip the other way, and we have. So,
Rich, I have a little bit different take on this. I mean, I think someone said to me when I was campaigning, when I was running for office, and I refused to go negative, and then I ended up doing some negative. It was issue based. I want to be very clear. It wasn't personal.
We call that comparative, Keith.
We call that comparative. Yeah, exactly. And I said, man, this isn't sit. And candidly, when people quit responding to it, it'll stop. That's the key. I mean, the truth is, what my consultant said was a little bit crude, but he said, look, negative campaigning is $1 billion industry, just like pornography, that nobody looks at. And the truth is, he's right. If it didn't work, we wouldn't do it, right? People wouldn't do it. And that's when the American public, and I think you're starting to see some of that, is getting fed up with some of the crap, saying enough is enough. I actually want to know what this person stands for. I don't want you to define them, define yourself. The public's going to have to push back on this as well and say, we are tired of it. It's the whole social media crap we could spend hours talking about. Yeah. Enough is enough. And that's the public has to say that.
Real quickly, because time is really running out. I want to talk about redistricting really fast. Hey, until very recently, we redistricted once every 10 years. You do a census, 2 years later, you have a map. That's redistricting. Now we seem to redistrict whenever it's convenient for one party or the other. Jayne, I know this isn't a big issue in New Hampshire. John, I know this has become a big issue in Indiana. Talk to me about redistricting.
Gerrymander, I guess it's a gerrymander, the gerrymander. I mean, it's a kind of, it's certainly something that we got a lot of pressure from the White House on a governor and on the legislature to redistrict and grab two more seats. That we already have 7 of the 9. So we've
And to
hesitated.
eliminate
Uh,
Indianapolis as a minority district. I mean,
yeah,
isn't the
it would
point?
potentially do all those things. So there's some blowback here. It's not universally popular, and the governor has not called anyone into special session yet because I think there's some hesitation, and frankly, there probably should be. It's people perceive it as the same old business out of politicians, and they see it as cheating in a way. But it's certainly the most political thing we do, and it's all politics. I get that, but I'll stop there because we're running out of time. But that is a major debate here, and so far we have not convened to redistrict, even though we've had immense pressure from the Trump administration to do so.
What do you guys think about the refusal of the speaker to sit a popularly elected member of the House of Representatives, Representative Grijalva, in Arizona? I mean, she was elected. Usually, they get sworn in the next day. He has refused to meet with her and swear her in because he doesn't want to give the Democrats another seat. Jayne, what do you think?
You know, it's similar to how New Hampshire dealt with redistricting, and that the Governor Sununu refused to sign a bill that would have given an advantage to actually our own party in one district and the other party. It gets to this question: how much are we willing to kind of game the system for politically advantageous things for either ourselves or for the other party? I very much think that long term, those kind of quick decisions don't play out well for either party. We'll see. Arizona is a different state. We'll see what their state politics are. But longer term, I think those short wins or perceived short wins don't help long term for the party.
Listen, I know we're really running out of time, so I'm going to ask you guys one last question, which you're going to hate. I'm going to tell you in advance, you're going to hate. So I'm going to say it anyway. Okay, we're going to do this starting with the first in the nation state. Jayne, who's the 2028 Republican nominee for president?
Oh my gosh. I so there's one thing you can't nail me
I
down
should
on
tell
that
you, I asked
because,
Anthony Scaramucci this when he was on the program, and he answered it.
well, I am a true believer in the first in the nation primary. And so that means that until that first vote happens in Dixville Notch, we don't know who that nominee is going to be. But we have lots of great candidates, and I'll give you a very political answer, which is that I don't know.
That was a very political answer from the
Yes.
chairwoman of the Republican Party of New Hampshire.
Who
John,
loves primaries and loves voters to have their say.
John,
Glenn Youngkin.
Glenn Youngkin. Okay, interesting.
Interesting. I think there's as much chance that it's Richard Gordon as anybody, to be honest with you. At this point,
Well, I
I
am
mean,
thinking
heck,
of running, so thank you.
there you go. I'm starting your campaign today, Richard. It's interesting. Bill Maher sounds more like a Republican than he ever has when I listen to him. So I don't know who it's going to be right at this point. I'm with Jayne. I think guessing at this point. I don't think that person's probably not even on the radar right now, to be honest with you.
I had a boss many years ago who said, for things we can't decide like this, between now and then a pope will be born because it's so like ridiculous. You guys have been great. I promise to get you off in time. I'm going to do it. I can't tell you how much I appreciate each of you, not just for doing this, but for your friendship over many, many, many years. Your dear friends, your leaders, not just in your party, your leaders in this country. And I respect and admire each of you for what you've done, your public service, and your commitment to this country. So thank you. And as I tell all my guests, remember, stay unconventional. So thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard.
Thanks
Hey,
so
let me
much.
just close. Let me just close the program real quickly by saying a couple of things, if I may. Um, you just heard from three guests who are leaders who found a way to get things done in each of their states, and they made government work. Something we're not seeing a heck of a lot right now. And they did it by working, excuse me, within their own party and by reaching across the other party and doing something that we don't do anymore. It's called compromise. There's nothing wrong with that, finding common ground. And I'm really saddened by the harshness of our politics, the way we've been going, the way we're turning on each other, and we need to find a way back. And I yearn for what former President George Herbert Walker Bush used to talk about. He referred to as a kinder, gentler America. Today's guests show that it's possible. We can be kinder. We can be gentler. Actually, we can be better. And they've each shown this in their own careers. And I think it's something we should insist on from our elected officials. So I hope you folks out there will do that. When you see an elected official, tell them, let's turn the heat down. Listen, thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate it. You can hear us wherever you get your podcasts. You can always watch us on YouTube. We're on YouTube at UT-Richard Gordon. That's YouTube at the letter U, the letter T-Richard Gordon. So thank you for listening. I look forward to seeing you again next time. Till then, stay unconventional.
You've been listening to Unconventional Times with your host, Richard Gordon. Check out all of the episodes of Unconventional Times on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Richard Gordon and all of his unconventional conversations, head on over to unconventionaltimes.com. Thanks for listening.